Have you ever wondered if your daily habits are pushing you further from God? Not the big sins, not the obvious mistakes, but the small things you do every day without thinking. The things that seem harmless yet slowly weaken your faith, cloud your heart, and create a distance between you and the one who loves you the most. Most people don't even realize it's happening. They live their lives on autopilot, moving through routines, caught up in the world, unaware that the choices they make each day, no matter how small, are shaping their spiritual destiny. But the truth is, the little things matter. The smallest habits can build a strong connection with God, or they can slowly, silently, and dangerously pull you away from Him. And that's exactly what this video is about. By the end, you will see your daily life differently. You will understand how 5 common habits so many people have, are displeasing to God. But more than that, you will learn how to break free, turn back, and realign your heart with His will. So stay with me until the end, because this is not just information, this is transformation. And by the time you finish watching, you will feel something shift inside you, a new awareness, a new understanding, and maybe, just maybe, a new beginning. Everything we do, every decision we make, every word we speak, it all matters. Nothing is too small for God to notice. Nothing is hidden from Him. But here's the problem. We live in a world that tells us otherwise. A world that says it's just a small habit. It's not a big deal. Everyone does it. And so without realizing it, we start to compromise. A missed prayer here, a careless word there, a moment of distraction, a little more focus on the world, a little less focus on God. It happens so gradually, so quietly, that we don't even feel the shift until one day we wake up and wonder why our hearts feel heavy, why our faith feels weak, why God feels distant. But here's the truth. God never moves away from us. We move away from Him. And the most dangerous part, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens through small daily habits, habits that feel normal, habits that feel harmless. But make no mistake, what feels harmless today can become a heavy chain tomorrow. Psychology proves it. Studies show that our daily habits shape our identity. The things we do repeatedly don't just define our actions, they define who we become. A person who prays daily becomes a person of faith. A person who speaks negativity becomes a person of doubt. A person who constantly chases the world becomes a person who forgets God. And that's why this message is so important, because awareness is the first step to change. If you don't know what's pulling you away, how can you fix it? If you don't see the problem, how can you find the solution? The good news is, it's never too late. No matter how far you've gone, no matter how deep you've fallen, God's mercy is always greater than your mistakes. He is always ready to welcome you back, but He won't force you. You must decide. So today you have a choice. Continue living as you are, unaware of the small habits that are shaping your destiny, or open your heart, reflect on your daily actions, and take the first step toward a closer, stronger, and deeper relationship with God. The decision is yours, but before you make it, ask yourself, are my daily habits pleasing to God, or are they silently pulling me away from Him? If you're ready to find out, then let's begin, because what you're about to hear could change your life. Let's uncover the first habit. Most people don't realize they're drifting away from God. It doesn't happen suddenly. It doesn't come with a warning. It happens in silence, in the background of daily life, a slow fading, a quiet distance, and before they know it, they wake up feeling empty, lost, and disconnected, but they don't know why. This is the reality of spiritual blindness, a condition where the heart becomes dull, where the soul becomes numb, and where a person keeps moving forward without realizing they're heading in the wrong direction. And the most dangerous part? They think everything is fine. Spiritual blindness doesn't mean rejecting God. It doesn't mean denying faith. It simply means living in a way where faith is no longer the center. It's when prayer becomes an afterthought, when the Bible gathers dust, when the heart becomes more excited about the things of this world than the presence of God. It's a slow drift, a quiet separation. Not loud, not obvious, but deadly. And this is exactly why so many people wake up one day feeling lost, overwhelmed, and restless. They chase happiness, but never find it. They try to fill the emptiness, but nothing works. No matter how much success they achieve, no matter how many distractions they find, something always feels missing. Because the truth is, the soul was never designed to live without God. Psychology confirms this. Studies show that people who live without purpose, who lack a deeper connection to something greater, experience higher levels of anxiety, depression, and emotional exhaustion. Their minds become restless. Their hearts feel heavy, and their lives become a cycle of endless searching, but never finding. That's what happens when a person becomes spiritually blind. They stop seeing what truly matters. But here's the thing. No one is born spiritually blind. It happens over time, and in most cases, it starts with small compromises. At first, it's skipping prayer because life is busy. Then it's choosing entertainment over time with God. Then it's making small excuses. It's not a big deal. I'll pray later. I'll read scripture tomorrow. Then slowly, without realizing it, the heart begins to drift. And the scariest part? A person in this state won't even notice what's happening. Because spiritual blindness doesn't feel like blindness. It feels normal. It feels comfortable. It feels like life is just happening. That's why so many people struggle without knowing why. They think the problem is stress or lack of motivation or just a difficult season. But in reality, it's much deeper than that. The real problem is that their soul is running on empty. A person can survive without food for weeks, without water for days, but the soul cannot survive a single day without God. And yet, many live their lives as if He is optional, as if His presence is something to fit into their schedule instead of the center of their existence. But deep down, every heart knows the truth. That's why, even in the middle of worldly success, something still feels incomplete. That's why, no matter how much a person achieves, they still feel a quiet loneliness inside. That's why, when the world becomes silent and distractions fade, they feel something pulling at them, something deeper, something missing, because the soul knows when it's disconnected from its Creator. And this is where everything can change. The moment a person realizes they have been spiritually blind is the moment they can wake up. The good news, spiritual blindness is not permanent. It can be reversed. It can be healed. But first it must be recognized. It takes humility. It takes honesty. It takes a heart willing to say, maybe I've been blind. Maybe I've been distracted. Maybe I've been living on autopilot. But the moment that realization happens, everything shifts. The weight that once felt heavy begins to lift. The confusion that once clouded the mind begins to clear. And the heart that once felt empty begins to awaken. Because God is not distant. He is not hiding. He has been there all along, waiting for the moment when a person opens their eyes, waiting for the moment when they turn back, waiting for the moment when they say, God, I need you. And in that moment, no matter how far they have wandered, no matter how blind they have been, He restores their sight. He revives their heart. He welcomes them home. But the question is, will they take that step? Will they open their eyes? Will they recognize the habits that have slowly, silently pulled them away? Because once they do, everything changes. The first and most dangerous habit that displeases God is neglecting prayer. It may seem small, but it is the root of spiritual weakness. It is the first step toward feeling lost, disconnected, and uncertain about life. Prayer is not just a religious duty. It is not just words spoken into the air. Prayer is connection. It is the bridge between the human heart and the Creator. It is the moment where heaven meets earth, where the soul finds rest, where worries fade, and where faith grows stronger. But when prayer is neglected, something inside begins to change. The heart becomes restless. The mind becomes cluttered. Doubts start to creep in. Fear starts to take over, because without prayer, the soul loses its lifeline. And yet so many people treat prayer as an option. They tell themselves, I'll pray later. But later never comes. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and before they realize it, prayer is no longer a daily habit. It becomes something they only do when they are desperate, when life gets hard, when problems arise. But here's the truth. A person who only prays in crisis will always live in crisis, because when prayer is missing, faith weakens, and when faith weakens, worry takes over. The smallest problems feel heavy. The smallest setbacks feel impossible, and life starts to feel overwhelming. Psychology proves this. Studies show that people who practice daily prayer experience less anxiety, greater emotional stability, and a stronger sense of inner peace. Prayer is not just a religious practice. It is a scientifically proven way to quiet the mind, regulate emotions, and strengthen resilience. But more importantly, prayer is the foundation of a strong relationship with God. Because just like any relationship, connection requires communication. A person cannot claim to love someone if they never speak to them, never listen to them, never spend time with them. And yet, many people say they love God, but their actions show otherwise. They have time for social media, time for entertainment, time for distractions, but no time to speak to the one who gave them life. And that is why prayerlessness is dangerous. Because when a person stops praying, they don't just lose connection with God, they also lose connection with themselves. They forget who they are. They forget their purpose, and they start looking for answers in all the wrong places. That's why life feels confusing. That's why nothing ever seems to be enough, because without prayer, the soul forgets its source. But here's the good news. It's never too late to start again. No matter how long it has been, no matter how distant a person feels, the moment they return to prayer, everything begins to shift. The burden that once felt heavy begins to lift. The confusion that once clouded the mind begins to fade. And the emptiness that once filled the heart begins to disappear. Because the moment a person starts praying again, they are no longer walking alone. They are no longer fighting battles in their own strength. They are no longer carrying burdens that were never meant to be carried alone, because prayer invites God into the struggles, into the worries, into the fears, into the pain. When God steps in, everything changes. But here's the challenge. Prayer must become a daily habit. Not just in emergencies, not just when life is falling apart, but in every season, in every moment, in every situation. Because prayer is not just about asking for things, it's about alignment, it's about surrender, it's about reminding the soul that God is in control. A person who prays daily is not free from problems, but they are free from fear. They still face challenges, but they don't face them alone. They still experience struggles, but they have peace in the storm, because they know that no matter what happens, God is with them. So today there is a choice to make. Stay in the habit of neglecting prayer and continue feeling distant, uncertain, and lost, or make the decision to return, to open the heart, to speak to God, to rebuild the connection that was once so strong. Because at the end of the day, prayer is not a burden. It is a privilege, a direct line to the creator of the universe, an open invitation to step into his presence, a moment where heaven listens, where peace is restored, where faith is strengthened. And the best part, God is always listening. It doesn't matter how far a person has drifted. It doesn't matter how long they've been silent. The moment they return, the moment they speak, the moment they whisper even the smallest prayer, he hears. And that is where everything begins to change. There is a reason so many people feel lost. A reason why life seems confusing, why decisions feel overwhelming, why peace feels so distant. It's not because life is harder than before. It's not because the world is more chaotic. It's because people have drifted from the truth that gives wisdom, the truth that brings clarity, the truth that speaks to the soul when everything else feels uncertain. And that truth is found in one place, the Word of God. But today, many have ignored it. Not because they don't believe in God, not because they don't want to follow Him, but because they have been too distracted, too busy, too caught up in the noise of life to stop and listen to the voice of their Creator. And the result, confusion, uncertainty, a life full of questions, but no answers. Because without the Word of God, the mind becomes vulnerable. It becomes shaped by the world instead of the truth. It becomes influenced by emotions instead of wisdom. It becomes controlled by fear instead of faith. And slowly, without realizing it, people start making decisions that lead them further and further away from the life God intended for them. Because here's the truth. Every person is shaped by what they listen to. If they listen to fear, they become fearful. If they listen to negativity, they become negative. If they listen to the world, they start living like the world. And that is why ignoring the Word of God is so dangerous. Because when a person stops filling their mind with truth, they start believing lies. Lies about themselves. Lies about their future. Lies about their worth. They start thinking they're not good enough. That they will never change. That their past defines them. That God is distant. That He has forgotten them. But none of this is true. The problem is not that God is silent. The problem is that people have stopped listening because His Word is alive. It speaks, it directs, it corrects, it transforms. But only for those who are willing to hear it. Psychology confirms this. Studies show that the thoughts a person feeds their mind determine their emotions, their behaviors, and their entire life experience. If they fill their mind with wisdom, they make wise choices. If they fill their mind with truth, they live in clarity. If they fill their mind with faith, they walk in confidence. But if they ignore the Word of God, they are left to navigate life on their own. And this is where many go wrong. They think they don't need guidance. They think they can handle things by themselves. They think they can rely on their own wisdom, their own strength, their own understanding. But the reality is, human wisdom is limited. Feelings change, emotions shift, thoughts are unreliable, and when a person leans on their own understanding instead of God's Word, they will always find themselves lost, confused, and overwhelmed. That's why God gave His Word, not as a set of rules, not as something to read once in a while, but as a light, a guide, a source of strength, wisdom, and truth in a world full of deception. Because without the Word, the soul is like a ship without a compass. It may move, but it has no direction. It may travel, but it doesn't know where it's going. But here's the good news. It's never too late to return. It doesn't matter how long a person has ignored the Word. It doesn't matter how far they have drifted. The moment they open it again, the moment they begin to listen, everything starts to change. Because the Word of God is not just a book. It is not just words on a page. It is power to break chains, power to restore faith, power to renew the mind, power to bring peace in the middle of chaos. But it requires a decision to stop ignoring what God has already spoken, a decision to stop relying on human wisdom, a decision to make His Word the foundation of life, not just something to read occasionally, but something to live by. Because the truth is, whatever fills the mind will shape the life. If a person fills their mind with worry, their life will be full of anxiety. If they fill their mind with doubt, their life will be full of hesitation. But if they fill their mind with the Word of God, their life will be full of faith, strength, and direction. The choice is simple. Continue living in uncertainty or return to the source of wisdom. Continue feeling lost or let God's Word be the guide. Because the moment a person opens their heart to the truth, the lies begin to fall away, the doubts begin to disappear, the confusion begins to clear, and in that moment they realize something powerful. God has been speaking all along. The question is, will they listen? Anger is a powerful emotion. It can start as a small spark, but if left unchecked, it can grow into a fire that destroys everything in its path. Relationships, peace, joy, even physical health. And yet, so many people hold on to it. They carry grudges. They replay past hurts in their minds. They hold on to offenses as if keeping them will somehow make things right. But in reality, holding on to anger doesn't hurt the person who caused the pain. It only destroys the one who refuses to let go. Because here's the truth. Unforgiveness is a prison. It traps the mind in the past. It keeps wounds open. It steals joy from the present and hope from the future. And the worst part, the person holding on to it is the one who suffers the most. Studies in psychology confirm this. Research shows that people who hold on to anger and resentment experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and even physical illness. Their bodies are constantly in a state of tension. Their minds are filled with negativity, and over time, their hearts become hardened. And that is what makes unforgiveness so dangerous. It doesn't just affect emotions, it affects the soul, because when a person refuses to forgive, their heart starts to change. They become bitter, their thoughts become poisoned, their attitude becomes negative, and soon, they don't just hold on to the pain, they become it. But here's what many don't realize. Forgiveness is not about the other person. It's not about saying that what happened was okay. It's not about letting someone escape consequences. It's not about pretending that pain didn't happen. Forgiveness is about freedom. Freedom from the weight of carrying the past. Freedom from the poison of bitterness. Freedom from the control that pain has over the heart. Because the moment a person forgives, they are no longer bound to what happened. They are no longer trapped in a cycle of pain. They are no longer giving power to the person or situation that hurt them. And this is why unforgiveness displeases God, because it keeps his children in bondage. God never intended for people to live in anger, to carry resentment, to be chained to bitterness. His desire is for his people to walk in peace, in freedom, in healing. But healing cannot come where forgiveness is absent, because every time anger is entertained, every time resentment is fed, every time the past is replayed, the wound is reopened. And a wound that is constantly reopened can never heal. This is why letting go is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of strength. Because it takes strength to release what was meant to destroy. It takes strength to choose peace over revenge. It takes strength to rise above what was meant to break the spirit. And most importantly, it takes faith. Faith that God sees, faith that God knows, faith that God is the ultimate judge, and he will handle justice in his way, in his time, because forgiveness does not mean trust must be restored. It does not mean relationships must go back to the way they were. It does not mean forgetting the lesson. It simply means choosing to no longer carry the weight of the offense. And the moment a person makes that choice, everything begins to change. The heart feels lighter. The mind becomes clearer. The soul experiences peace that was missing for so long. Because here's the truth. A person cannot move forward if they are still holding on to the past. So today, there is a choice to make. A choice to continue carrying the burden, or a choice to release it. A choice to let anger dictate life, or a choice to surrender it to God. A choice to stay bound, or a choice to walk in freedom. Because forgiveness is not just about the past. It is about the future. A future that is no longer controlled by pain. A future that is free from the chains of resentment. A future that is filled with peace, healing, and the joy that comes from letting go. And that future is available. The only question is, will it be chosen? What happens when communication stops in a relationship? When one person no longer talks, no longer listens, no longer shares their thoughts, their struggles, their desires? The relationship weakens. The connection fades. The bond that once held them together begins to break. And yet, this is exactly what happens when a person neglects prayer, because prayer is not a ritual. It is not just a religious act. It is not something to be done only in times of trouble or in moments of desperation. Prayer is the lifeline of the soul. It is the connection between the Creator and his creation. It is the way to draw near to God, to seek his wisdom, to receive his strength, to experience his presence. But when prayer is neglected, something dangerous happens. The heart begins to drift from faith, drift from peace, drift from purpose. And without even realizing it, life starts feeling heavy. The burdens become overwhelming. The mind becomes restless. The soul feels distant from the very source that gives it life. Because a prayerless life is a powerless life. It is a life that tries to fight battles alone. A life that leans on human strength instead of divine power. A life that searches for answers everywhere except from the one who holds all wisdom. And over time, the effects of neglecting prayer begin to show. Decisions become harder because there is no guidance. Worries increase because there is no peace. Temptations become stronger because there is no spiritual strength. And the most dangerous part? The voice of God becomes harder to hear. Not because he is silent, not because he is distant, but because a heart that does not seek God will struggle to recognize his voice. Psychology confirms this. Studies show that people who regularly engage in deep reflection, meditation, or prayer experience lower stress levels, greater emotional stability, and a stronger sense of purpose in life. Because prayer is not just about asking for things. It is about aligning the heart with God. It is about surrendering control. It is about shifting focus from problems to the one who holds the solution. But too often, prayer is neglected because of busyness. People rush through life. They fill their schedules. They chase success, responsibilities, entertainment. And in the middle of it all, they forget the most important thing, staying connected to the one who gave them life. But here's the truth. A person can gain everything, but if they lose their connection with God, they have lost everything that truly matters. Because strength does not come from effort alone. Peace does not come from perfect circumstances. Wisdom does not come from human logic. These things come from God, and the only way to receive them is through prayer. That is why neglecting prayer is dangerous, because without it, the spirit becomes weak, the heart becomes empty, and life feels directionless. But the good news is, it is never too late to return. It doesn't take hours of deep theological words. It doesn't require a perfect formula. It doesn't require being in a specific place. It only requires a willing heart, a heart that humbles itself before God, a heart that seeks Him not just in moments of crisis, but every single day, a heart that knows true strength comes not from within, but from above. Because every time a person prays, something powerful happens. Chains break, worries fade, direction becomes clear, strength is renewed. Because prayer is not just speaking, it is receiving. Receiving wisdom, peace, clarity, and divine power to overcome every challenge in life. And this is why God longs for His people to pray, not because He needs their words, but because they need His presence. Because without prayer, life feels overwhelming. But with prayer, even the greatest storms can be faced with courage. And so the question is, will the connection be restored? When was the last time you truly saw someone? Not just glanced at them, not just walked past them, but really saw them, their struggles, their pain, their silent cries for help. Too often, life becomes self-centered. People focus on their own problems, their own dreams, their own needs, and in the process, they forget something essential. They were never meant to live just for themselves. Because true purpose is not found in taking, it is found in giving. But when a person ignores the needs of others, something dangerous happens. Their heart starts to harden. Their spirit becomes numb. Their compassion begins to fade, and slowly, without even realizing it, they become disconnected. Disconnected from people, disconnected from kindness, disconnected from the very love that God calls every person to show. Because here's the truth. God didn't create people to live in isolation. He created them to serve, to help, to care. But in today's world, selfishness is disguised as success. People are taught to focus on themselves, to chase personal goals, to build their own comfort, to prioritize their own happiness above everything else. And yet, a life that is only lived for self is an empty life. Psychologists have proven this. Studies show that people who practice kindness and generosity experience greater happiness, lower stress, and a stronger sense of purpose. Because the human heart was designed to give, but when giving is neglected, something is lost. The ability to feel deeply, the ability to connect meaningfully, the ability to see beyond personal struggles and make a difference in someone else's life. And that is why ignoring the needs of others displeases God, because it is the opposite of what He created people for. He created them to lift, not tear down, to encourage, not ignore, to love, not be indifferent. Because love is not just a word, it is an action. And every day there are opportunities to show it. A kind word to someone who feels invisible. A small act of help to someone who is struggling. A moment of listening to someone who has no one to talk to. These are not just small things. These are the moments that define character. But when people refuse to see the needs around them, they close the door to something powerful. The chance to be a light in someone's darkness. And here's what many don't realize. Helping others doesn't just change their life, it changes the giver's life too, because generosity creates joy. Compassion creates connection. Kindness creates meaning. And when a person chooses to live with an open heart, they begin to see life differently. They begin to feel the presence of God more deeply. They begin to experience the fulfillment that no amount of success or wealth can bring. Because true success is not measured by what is gained, it is measured by what is given. And that is the challenge today, to not just look, but to see, to not just exist, but to make a difference, to not just live for self, but to live for something greater. Because in the end, the question will not be how much was achieved, but how much was given. And the answer to that question will define the legacy left behind. Life is full of choices. Every single day, people make decisions, some small, some life-changing. But here's a question. What happens when someone ignores the voice of God, not just once, not just in moments of weakness, but consistently choosing their own way, silencing that quiet whisper in their heart, walking a path that feels right in their own eyes, but leads them further from truth? It starts subtly. A small compromise, a little justification, a decision made out of pride or convenience. And at first, nothing seems wrong. Life goes on. The consequences are not immediate, but slowly something begins to shift. The heart becomes restless. Because deep down, the soul knows when it is walking in the wrong direction. It knows when it is moving away from the purpose it was created for. It knows when it is rejecting the very guidance that was meant to protect it. And yet many still ignore it. Why? Because listening to God requires surrender. It requires humility. It requires admitting that human wisdom is limited, that emotions can be deceptive, that personal desires are not always aligned with what is right. But when people resist that surrender, when they choose their own way over God's way, the consequences follow. At first, it's just a feeling, a loss of peace, a mind that is constantly anxious, a heart that is never fully content, a life that feels like it's missing something, but nothing seems to fill that empty space. Then relationships start to suffer. Because when the heart is disconnected from God, it becomes disconnected from others. Pride takes over. Selfishness grows. Forgiveness becomes harder, and before long, people find themselves stuck in patterns of regret, repeating mistakes, chasing temporary happiness, feeling lost even when they seem to have everything. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, when a person's actions don't align with their beliefs, creating inner conflict, stress, and emotional exhaustion. And this is exactly what happens when someone ignores God's guidance, because deep down they know when they've chosen the wrong path. They know when they've prioritized the wrong things. They know when they've silenced that inner voice warning them to turn back. But here's the dangerous part. The longer a person ignores God, the harder it becomes to hear him. Not because he stops speaking, not because he stops caring, but because their heart becomes too hardened to listen. And that is why so many people today feel lost. They have walked so far in their own direction that they no longer recognize the way back. But here's the truth. It is never too late to return. God never turns away a heart that is willing to change. He never rejects a soul that seeks him with sincerity. He never stops guiding those who truly want to follow him. But it starts with a decision to listen, a decision to surrender, a decision to stop walking alone and start trusting the one who knows the way. Because true peace, true purpose, and true fulfillment are only found in one place: obedience to God. And when that obedience is chosen, everything changes. The weight of regret lifts, the confusion fades, the restless heart finally finds its home. Because a life that follows God is a life that is never truly lost. Have you ever felt too far gone? As if you've made too many mistakes, ignored too many warnings, and walked too far in the wrong direction? It's a feeling that creeps in slowly. First it's guilt, then it's shame, then it's the lie that whispers, "There's no way back, you've gone too far." But here's the truth. No one is ever too far from God's grace. No mistake is too big. No failure is too deep. No distance is too wide, because the love of God doesn't work like human love. It doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't keep score. It doesn't walk away. People walk away, but God remains. Yet so many hesitate to return, not because they don't want to, but because they feel unworthy. They believe they must first fix themselves, clean themselves up, or prove they are better. But that is not how grace works. Grace is not earned, it is given. And the moment a person turns back, the moment they say, God, I need you, everything changes. Because God does not welcome people with disappointment. He welcomes them with open arms. Psychologists have studied this. They've found that guilt and shame, when left unresolved, create self-sabotage, causing people to push away the very things that could heal them. And this is exactly what happens spiritually. People assume they need to be good enough to approach God, but that mindset keeps them trapped. It keeps them distant. It keeps them believing a lie, because God never asked for perfection. He asked for surrender. And the moment a person stops running, stops hiding, and simply says, God, I can't do this alone, he steps in, he heals, he restores, he renews. And suddenly what once felt like a dead end becomes a new beginning, because the road back to God is always open, always waiting. But it requires one thing, a choice to let go of the past, a choice to silence the voice of shame, a choice to believe that God's mercy is greater than any mistake. And when that choice is made, the weight lifts, the fear disappears, the brokenness begins to heal. Because the moment someone takes one step toward God, they realize he was already running toward them. And that is the power of returning. It is not about what has been lost. It is about what is waiting to be found. Why is it so hard to let go? Why do people cling so tightly to control, to their own plans, to their own way, when deep down they know they're exhausted? Because surrender feels like weakness. It feels like giving up. The world teaches that strength means fighting harder, pushing further, doing more. But here's a truth that most people miss. Real strength is not found in control. Real strength is found in surrender. Surrendering to God is not about quitting. It's about trusting. It's about laying down the burden of trying to figure everything out alone. It's about finally admitting, I don't have to do this by myself. And that realization, it changes everything. Because as long as people try to control life on their own, they live in constant anxiety. They worry about the future. They stress over outcomes. They feel the weight of making everything work. And when things don't go as planned, frustration takes over. But when someone surrenders to God, a shift happens. The pressure lifts. The fear fades. The battle inside their mind quiets, because they no longer have to carry it all. And this is not just a spiritual truth. It is psychological. Studies have shown that people who release control, who trust a higher power, who embrace faith instead of fear, experience lower stress, reduced anxiety, and a greater sense of inner peace. Because the mind was never designed to carry everything alone. The heart was never meant to walk this journey without guidance. And yet so many people hold on. They cling to control because they are afraid of the unknown. They fear that if they let go, things will fall apart. But what if surrender isn't losing control? What if it's finally giving control to the one who knows what is best? What if surrender isn't weakness? What if it's the greatest act of courage? Because to surrender means to trust that even when things don't make sense, God has a plan. To trust that even in the waiting, something greater is being prepared. To trust that even in the struggles, there is purpose. And when a person finally stops fighting against God, when they finally say, I trust you, they experience something they never thought possible. Peace. Not the temporary peace that comes from good circumstances, but real peace. The kind that stays even in the storm. Because surrender is not about losing, it's about gaining. Gaining clarity, gaining strength. Gaining the freedom that comes from knowing life is no longer carried alone. And that kind of surrender, it doesn't lead to defeat, it leads to victory. Because a life placed in God's hands is a life that is no longer driven by fear, but by faith. And faith is what turns uncertainty into confidence. It is what turns obstacles into opportunities. It is what transforms a weary heart into a heart that is strong, bold, and unshakable. But it all begins with one decision, the decision to let go, fear. It's the silent force that holds people back. It whispers lies. It magnifies doubts. It keeps people stuck in a cycle of hesitation, questioning, and second-guessing. Fear makes the future feel uncertain. It makes the past feel like a weight that can't be lifted. It makes the present feel overwhelming. And yet most people don't even realize how much fear is controlling them. They think it's just being cautious. They think it's just being realistic. They think they're protecting themselves from disappointment. But in reality, fear is not protecting them. It's limiting them, because fear and faith cannot coexist. Faith says, step forward, even if you don't see the whole path. Fear says, don't move until you have all the answers. Faith says, trust that God is making a way. Fear says, what if nothing works out? Faith says, you are not alone. Fear says, you have to figure this out by yourself. And here's the truth. People who live in fear never experience the fullness of life God intended. They hesitate when they should act. They worry when they should trust. They shrink back when they should move forward. But faith changes everything, because faith doesn't rely on what is seen. Faith doesn't wait for perfect conditions. Faith doesn't demand all the answers before taking a step. And that is where true strength is found, not in knowing every detail of the journey, but in knowing who is leading the way. Because when someone chooses to walk in faith instead of fear, something powerful happens. Fear loses its grip. The voice of doubt gets quieter. The weight of anxiety gets lighter. The hesitation begins to disappear. And suddenly, instead of feeling stuck, they feel free, because they are no longer trying to control everything. They are no longer relying on their own limited understanding. They are no longer waiting for everything to make sense before trusting God's direction. And that kind of faith, it is unshakable. It doesn't break under pressure. It doesn't give up in the face of obstacles. It doesn't collapse when things don't go as planned. Because real faith understands that even in the unknown, God is still in control. And when someone truly believes that, fear has no power over them. They stop being afraid of failure because they know that even failures can lead to growth. They stop being afraid of the future because they trust that God is already ahead of them. They stop being afraid of what others think, because they know that their worth comes from God, not from opinions. And that kind of confidence, it changes everything. Because when fear is no longer the loudest voice, life opens up. Doors that once seemed impossible begin to open. Strength that once felt unreachable begins to grow. Peace that once felt distant becomes real. Because fear is no longer leading the way, faith is. And a life led by faith is a life that is no longer trapped by limitations, but empowered by possibilities. A life that doesn't wait for certainty, but moves with confidence. A life that doesn't shrink back, but steps forward with boldness. A life that is no longer held captive by fear, but set free by trust. And that is the life God calls people to live. Not a life of hesitation, not a life of doubt, not a life of constantly questioning, worrying, or waiting for perfect conditions, but a life that moves forward, fully trusting that no matter what happens, God is always in control. Faith without action is incomplete. Believing is the first step, but walking in that belief is what truly transforms a life. How many people say they trust God but never take a step forward? How many pray for direction but hesitate when the path is revealed? How many ask for strength but refuse to step out of their comfort zone? Faith is not just about thinking differently, it's about living differently, because trust is proven through action. A person can say they believe in God's plan, but if they refuse to move when He calls, are they really trusting? Obedience is the bridge between faith and fulfillment. It's not just hearing God's voice, it's following it. It's not just understanding His word, it's applying it. It's not just knowing the right thing, it's doing it even when it's hard. And that's where most people struggle, because obedience requires courage. It requires stepping forward even when it's uncomfortable. It requires choosing faith over fear, discipline over excuses, and trust over doubt. And this is where breakthroughs happen. Not in waiting, but in moving. Think about how many prayers go unanswered, not because God isn't listening, but because the person praying refuses to act. They pray for opportunities, but never prepare. They pray for strength, but never step out in faith. They pray for guidance, but ignore the doors God is opening. But here's the truth. God will not do what you are refusing to do for yourself. Yes, He provides. Yes, He strengthens. Yes, He opens doors, but you still have to walk through them. You still have to take that first step. You still have to push past the fear. You still have to act on the faith you claim to have. Because miracles don't happen in hesitation. Breakthroughs don't come through excuses. Transformation doesn't take place in comfort zones. The moment someone obeys, things begin to shift. The doors they thought were locked start to open. The strength they thought they lacked begins to grow. The clarity they were waiting for starts to appear. Because God blesses action, not reckless action, but faith-driven action, not impulsive decisions, but obedient steps, not rushing ahead without wisdom, but moving forward with trust. And the best part, obedience brings peace. Because when someone is walking in alignment with God's will, they don't have to worry about the outcome. They don't have to stress about controlling every detail. They don't have to live in the anxiety of what if. They just move knowing that every step taken in faith is a step toward purpose. And that kind of life, it's unstoppable, because a person who moves in obedience doesn't need all the answers before they act. They don't need to see the full picture before they trust. They don't need every detail to be perfect before they start. They just walk forward, fully believing that as long as they are walking in faith, God will take care of the rest. Every time a person decides to walk in obedience, resistance will follow. It may come from self-doubt. It may come from fear. It may come from other people who don't understand the journey. Because the moment someone chooses faith over fear, the battle begins. The mind starts questioning, what if this doesn't work? The heart starts hesitating, what if I fail? The enemy starts whispering, you're not good enough. And this is where most people stop, not because they lack ability, not because God isn't leading them, not because they don't want change, but because resistance makes them second-guess their decision. And that's exactly why so many people stay stuck in the same cycles. They feel inspired for a moment, they take the first step. But when challenges come, they go back to what feels familiar. But real change, it requires pushing through resistance, because anything worth having will require effort. Any breakthrough worth experiencing will demand perseverance. Any transformation worth achieving will require commitment. And this is where true strength is built, not in moments of ease, but in moments of struggle. When the voice of doubt gets loud, but faith gets louder. When the fear of failure rises, but the determination to keep going rises higher. When everything says to stop, but the heart says, I refuse to quit. Because quitting is easy. Anyone can give up when things get hard. But those who refuse to quit, they are the ones who see results. They are the ones who rise above their circumstances. They are the ones who step into the life God has for them. They are the ones who break the cycles that have held them back for years. And that kind of commitment, it comes from a decision to not let temporary resistance stop eternal progress. Because what's on the other side of obedience is greater than the struggle it takes to get there. More peace, more clarity, more purpose, more fulfillment. But none of it happens without commitment. Commitment to trust, even when the path isn't clear. Commitment to keep moving, even when progress feels slow. Commitment to believe, even when doubts try to take over. And this is the difference between those who succeed and those who stay stuck. It's not about talent. It's not about intelligence. It's not about luck. It's about persistence. Because persistence breaks barriers. Persistence unlocks doors. Persistence proves that faith is stronger than fear. And the moment someone chooses to stay committed, despite the resistance, despite the doubts, despite the fears, that's the moment everything begins to change. Because God doesn't bless hesitation. He blesses endurance. He blesses those who refuse to quit. He blesses those who trust Him enough to keep moving forward, no matter what. Every great journey comes with obstacles. Every step of faith invites challenges. Every decision to obey is met with opposition. This is why so many people start strong but never finish. They begin with passion. They take action. They feel motivated. But the moment things get hard, they slow down. The moment they don't see quick results, they question their decision. The moment resistance appears, they start looking for an easier way. And that's when the real test begins. Because success is not determined by how well it's determined by how well they endure. The people who grow, the people who change, the people who step into their calling are not the ones who never struggle. They are the ones who keep moving despite the struggle. They push forward when fear tells them to stop. They keep believing when doubt tries to take over. They stay committed when everything inside them wants to quit. And this is what separates those who achieve breakthroughs from those who stay stuck. It's not intelligence. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's perseverance. Because God never promised an easy road. He never said there wouldn't be pain. He never said the journey wouldn't feel lonely at times. But he did promise strength for those who refuse to quit. And that strength, it comes in the moments when giving up feels like the only option. When the weight feels too heavy, God says, keep going. When the path feels unclear, God says, trust me. When the struggle feels endless, God says, I am with you. And that is what faith is about. Not just believing when things are easy, not just trusting when life is comfortable, not just following God when the road is smooth, but holding on when everything feels uncertain, standing strong when everything is shaking, moving forward when everything inside screams to stop, because those who refuse to quit will always see the reward. The doors that seemed locked will open. The strength they thought they lacked will appear. The purpose they doubted will become clear, and suddenly they will realize every struggle was worth it. Because real growth doesn't happen in comfort. Real faith isn't built in ease. Real strength is developed in the moments when quitting feels like the only way out, but they choose to keep going anyway. And when they look back, they won't regret a single step. Not the hardships, not the struggles, not the moments of uncertainty, because every challenge brought them closer. Every battle made them stronger. Every test deepened their faith, and in the end, they won't just have reached their destination, they will have become the person they were always meant to be, unshaken, unstoppable, and fully walking in the purpose God had for them all along. The greatest victories in life don't come from comfort, they come from faith. Faith to step into the unknown. Faith to trust when nothing makes sense. Faith to keep moving even when the road feels impossible. Because purpose isn't found in hesitation, it's found in action. But most people wait. They wait for a sign, they wait for perfect conditions, they wait for certainty before taking the first step. And that's why so many never step into the life they were created for. Because waiting doesn't build faith, action does. Faith is built when a person moves forward despite fear, when they trust God even when doubts arise, when they walk boldly even when they can't see the full picture. And this is where transformation happens, because the moment someone chooses faith over fear, their life changes, their thinking changes, their confidence grows, their purpose becomes clear, and suddenly they realize everything they've been searching for has always been on the other side of action, because God doesn't bless hesitation. He blesses movement. He blesses courage. He blesses those who are willing to step forward in obedience, even when the path is uncertain. But this kind of faith, it requires trust. Trust that even if things don't go as planned, He is still in control. Trust that even in the waiting, He is working. Trust that even in the setbacks, He is shaping something greater. And that's the secret to living a life of purpose, not waiting for every answer, not needing every detail, not letting fear stop the calling that's been placed inside, but walking forward in faith no matter what. Because fear will always try to delay destiny. Doubt will always try to block progress. Resistance will always try to steal momentum. But those who push past these things will experience the life they were created for. A life of meaning, a life of impact, a life of deep fulfillment. And it all starts with one decision, the decision to trust God fully and step into His plan no matter the cost. Because in the end, the greatest regret won't be the risks taken. It will be the moments of hesitation, the moments where faith could have led to something greater, but fear held them back. And no one wants to look back at their life and wonder, what if? What if they had trusted more? What if they had stepped forward sooner? What if they had believed that God was truly leading them? The truth is, it's never too late to start. It's never too late to break free from fear. It's never too late to step into faith. It's never too late to live with boldness, purpose, and complete trust in God's plan. Because the moment a person decides to move, everything begins to change. Doors open, strength rises, opportunities appear, and suddenly they realize God was guiding them all along. He was waiting, watching, preparing, waiting for them to trust, watching for them to take that first step, preparing a path greater than they ever imagined. And when that realization comes, everything becomes clear. Faith was always the answer.